knows
two
for-
questions.
Okay,
Let me repeat
I'm sorry,
them.
of course.
He's interested both in the issue about, from Karen's scholarly viewpoint, how about this negotiation with Queen Elizabeth, since it was rather unusual, and I am curious about that too. And then the other question was...
Just what scholarship is available?
Yeah, what scholarship is available on this particular figure?
Well, let me answer the first, I suppose, but answer in order. I had the good fortune to attend University College Galway, in Galway, Ireland, to study my master's degree for 1 semester. So I was there in Galway, in the Grace O Malley territory, and those original 18 articles of interrogatory, which are our primary bit on her, are interpreted. I can't speak Gaelic, of course, so they were written in Latin, and they're available there in Westport. And I did while I was there, I did some research on her, and I did a report on her in Ireland, when I was in Ireland. I was very fascinated by her. I visited Rockfleet Castle and Hens Castle and Achill Island and all the places. I became quite taken with her then. So there is some primary research, primary things available about her. In addition, there's quite a bit written about her at the time. Lord Henry Sidney, who was the governor of Connaught, he was the father of Philip Sidney, the poet, who became a good friend of Grace's, and you just can't work everything in the monologue, wrote quite a bit about her, recorded. There's quite a bit of recordings about Grace was captured, or Grace was punished, or Grace was, the pirates came. And so that has actually been all collected into a wonderful document called, written by her biographer named Anne Chambers. And I recommend it highly. I'm sure it's listed in the companion reader under my works cited. Granuale, it's called, and by Anne Chambers. And Anne Chambers takes all of these documents and translates them into English. It's a good thing for me. And so that's available, and that book has become my Bible in researching this character. So the scholarship exists. The second thing, as far as the Queen Elizabeth question, and I would say it's pretty much the same thing that I said. Many people have wondered, why did the Queen see her? You know, what was up with this situation? The Queen was on sort of a rising star. The Armada had happened just 5 years earlier. Things were pretty good for Queen Elizabeth, but she was already beginning. You know, Robert Devereux had already died. Her first favorite, his stepson then had become her favorite already. Lord Burleigh was getting ill at this time. Many of her closest companions, she was beginning to lose them. As she grew older in her career, in her Elizabeth, her reign, she grew more and more cut off from personal support. And people have supposed that the reason she saw Grace O Malley was a sense to try to find another woman who had something in common with her. No one knows for certain why she entertained her. There was a plague. Actually, the city was under plague threat at that time. That's why she was at Greenwich. And that's why I think that Grace O Malley threw the Kleenex away, the tissue away, or not tissue, the handkerchief, because there was plague at that time, and she didn't know who had used that before. You know, so I think that that's a possibility, but I don't know that for certain. I just do know that they were at Greenwich to avoid the plague. And no one knows for certain why she agreed to see her, why didn't throw her in chains first off. But people have supposed it's for that reason. Elizabeth was beginning to feel cut off from her support, personal support issues.
Over here, a question.
Certainly a very fascinating character. I was wondering if you would put it in your words why you think of her with this theme of the Renaissance. What makes her a Renaissance person?
What makes her a figure for us to be curious about in terms of trying to understand the European Renaissance?
Well, I think there's several issues that she can bring forward. First of all, she was a Renaissance woman in the respect that she was educated when women were not educated. She led men when women were not leading men. She was at a time she was trying to strike out and change the world around her with new ideas and new thoughts, and that's what the Renaissance was about. So she was a Renaissance woman during the Renaissance, I believe. I think that she is an important, I think for so much of us, we hear about the Troubles in Ireland. The Troubles in Ireland directly stem from this time that Grace talks about. This is when the Troubles, as they refer to with a capital T, began in 1601 when England defeated the Spanish and the Irish at Kinsale. That's when the Troubles began. It dates back to 1601. And so beginning to know that helps us to understand our own current world and understand what's happening in Ireland today, what's happening as Irish Americans and Americans in general try to understand the Troubles over there. And it's a rich and diverse history, it really is. And it gives us a beginning to understand that.
Yes, there was some. Yes, ma'am?
Was Grace wounded in battle, and how did she die?
Was Grace wounded in any of these battles, and how did she finally die?
There is no record of her being wounded. It's, you know, and the other question, of course, is records are sketchy. There's no question about that. But there is no record of it, and so I did not include that in anywhere in my. She must have been hurt at some point. Who knows? But we don't know that for a fact. There is really no mention of her after the battle in 1601. She sort of, we think that she dies at Rockfleet Castle, and is buried there nearby at the Cistern Abbey, there near Rockfleet Castle. And she died in 1603, the same year as Queen Elizabeth. So they lived, she was born 2 years before Queen Elizabeth and died the same year, probably a few months after. So that we really, there is no record of her in anything. I don't know if she went back to the sea, but I think that that would be where she would go to be free, to feel free. She was very disappointed in Ireland. She was disappointed in Tibet, and she was disappointed in all the things that had happened. Tibet, by the way, becomes a viscount, and he becomes a very important lord. He becomes the largest landowner in Mayo, which is the county there in Connaught. He's a very important person, and becomes, I think many of the Irish perceive him as being a traitor because he truly becomes English in every way. And so Hugh O'Neill, of course, is forced to leave with all the other leaders of that rebellion. It's called the Flight of the Earls in 1607, and they're finally forced to be exiled to France, taking with them the cream of the crop of the Irish leaders are forced to be exiled. They go to France hoping to continue to raise a rebellion, which doesn't really, they plant the seeds there because the Jacobite army grows out of that, that seed of the Irish, but it's of course a fruitless experience.
All right. Outside. Yes, ma'am. What happened on the castle, and do you think Grace went barefoot on her ships?
I suspect, again, we don't have photographs. I suspect that she wore the boots and the trews, they were called, which are the trousers, which are kind of, but you know, the ships were wooden and not finished. I mean, if you ever walk into the splinters that you get in your feet can be very painful. So I suspect she did not go barefoot on ship. I don't know for a fact. What was the other question? What happened to her castles? Rockfleet is very much in good shape still to this day. You can go to Achill Island, the edge of Achill Island, and see Rockfleet Castle. Castle Duna is in bad shape. The castle on Clare Island is nothing but ruins. Hen's Castle in Loch Carib is in very good shape. So most of her castles, you know, this was 500 years ago, 400 years ago. So she's she was. Many of them have fallen into ruin, but Rockfleet Castle is still in very good shape. There's a nice picture of me standing in front of Rockfleet Castle. It's a big square tower, and it had 4 levels of floors, you know, where the army would sleep, and then the next one they'd cook, and the top floor was her and Richard's apartment. There's a big, huge window looking out over the bay, and over the window there's a hole called a loophole, and she would run a string down to her favorite ship, and at night she would tie the other end to her big toe while she slept. You can still see the loophole there.
Yes, outside the tent.
You were talking about how she towered over Queen Elizabeth. Is there anything showing what size she really was?
She was saying she towered over Queen Elizabeth. Is there some evidence of that that's outside of her own report?
Other than the fact that the reports say, there's a wonderful poem that exists as a contemporary poem of the time that describes Grace O Malley's arrival in Greenwich. A contemporary poet. It's written in the Irish pedigree annals, actually. And it describes Grace O Malley as wearing a dress of saffron with a red cloak swirling around her heels, her wild red hair around her shoulder, held up with a silver bodkin in her hair, which is a knife. And she was barefoot. It does describe the fact that she was barefoot. And they just said, and then the fact that she stood next to the Queen and towered over her. So that's the only thing I can give you that we know. We don't know how tall she was. She must have been tall. Queen Elizabeth was not very tall.
Right.
But she must have been 5'8" or anyway, or 5'7", I suppose.
Wouldn't surprise me that, but maybe one of the reasons she was, able to lead men and everything is that she was an unusually
Physically
tall
yes.
person. Yes, right here. How many people actually died on her ships in these voyages?
How many people died? It would be impossible to count because there were so many battles, and it is sad to say that people die in battle. I mean, I think that's one of the sad realities of people who live this life. It was a different time than we lived, and people, you know, it was a time that we're not used to. Those things were often not recorded, and so we don't really know the answer to that.